In-laws made me sign a prenup because they thought I was poor. Now that I'm worth 5 times more than them, they want to dissolve it and are trying to force my wife to divorce me. 8 years ago, my wife and I got married, but before that, my in-laws decided to make me sign a prenup. I found that a bit insulting at the time, because they had made it quite clear that I was not really welcome in their family. So, making me sign the prenup just felt like even more of a slap in the face. I had been working in sales when I met my wife, but after being with her for 1 year, I decided to quit my job and start my own electronics brand. We were both 27 at the time, and by the time I finally got around to officially starting my business, I was almost 28. My wife had been supportive of me throughout the process, and she was the happiest when I finally got to start working on my dream business. Her parents, however, were not that happy because they thought I was living off her money, which was true to a certain extent. She was definitely supporting me because I didn't have a steady income, but it's not like I was completely relying on her either. Anyway, at 29, I decided to propose to her, and we got married within a year. But a couple of months before our wedding, her parents came to me and told me that I needed to sign a prenup that stated that, in the case of a divorce, all our assets and money would be kept separate. I could not stake a claim to anything that was hers, and vice versa. In the case of a divorce, I would also have to repay my wife and my in-laws for having supported me while I was working on my business, since they had occasionally sent money to my wife to help us out while we were living together. It was a reminder that I was indebted to them, which I thought was kind of unnecessary at that point in time. I'm pretty sure they included the second part of the clause, stating that even my wife would not be able to stake a claim to anything that was mine, so it would all be fair. The agreement even stated that if we decided to have a joint account, the money from that would also be divided on the basis of who had contributed more, because my in-laws had assumed that throughout our marriage, my wife would be supporting me. When they approached me with it, they told me that signing off on that would be the only way for them to feel safe about accepting me as their son-in-law. It was quite insulting for several reasons. Firstly, because they had just assumed that I would always rely on my wife and would never be able to make something of myself. That was an unfair assumption in itself because I was already working quite hard at the time to get my business going so that I wouldn't be a burden on my wife or anybody else. Secondly, even before I quit my job to start my business, they had never liked me. They had a problem with me right from the beginning, from the first time that my wife brought me to her house to introduce me to her parents, because they didn't think I was good enough to be dating their daughter. And by good, I actually just mean rich. For context, my in-laws have a real estate firm and have been doing quite well ever since they started. They come from financially well-off backgrounds themselves, so all of them have grown up comfortably. My parents had normal jobs though. My dad was a high school football coach, and my mom was the manager at a nearby coffee shop. So I didn't exactly have to struggle with money growing up, but I definitely didn't have the kind of money that my in-laws did. Right from the beginning, they used to look down on me. It was the usual snarky remarks, mean comments disguised as jokes, and just an insufferable and weird attitude around me in general. I never said a word about it, even though my wife got quite worked up about their behavior, because I didn't want them to know that they had managed to get under my skin. I believed that the best way to deal with them was by not paying any heed, because I knew that my wife loved me and I loved her, and that was good enough for both of us. I didn't need them to approve of us. So even when they approached me with the prenup, I felt a bit insulted, but I signed it. When they took it to my wife, she was quite offended. But I had discussed it with her beforehand, and she signed it as well, without any complaint. Both of us knew exactly what they were trying to accomplish. They were just trying to play mind games with me and insult me right before the wedding, maybe hoping I'd back off, so that they could accomplish what they had set out to do from the beginning, sideline me and somehow get their daughter to be with somebody more appropriate by their standards. Unfortunately for them, they haven't been able to do that so far, and they never will, because my wife and I are always going to be on one team. That was several years ago, and since then, I've made a lot of progress in my career. My business grew, and I kept working at it. And in the last 2 years, it took off exponentially and started doing better than it ever had. All of a sudden, I guess the social media marketing and all the hard work I had put into my company started to finally pay off. Whatever it was, something worked in our favor. And as of now, I'm worth almost 5 times more than what my in-laws are. So now, of course, they want to dissolve the prenup. All of a sudden, they came to visit us a couple of days back. We were all having dinner together, but after dinner, once our son was in bed, they got us both to sit down and told us that they had been giving it a lot of thought. And now they finally thought it was time to speak to their lawyers and have the prenup dissolved. My wife looked surprised, and even I was pretty taken aback for an instant, but then I decided to decline. I told them to their faces that I didn't think it was necessary since they themselves had claimed that the prenup was the only way they would feel safe accepting me as their son-in-law, and I didn't want them to lose their safety net. I was obviously being sarcastic, and I guess they picked up on that, even though I tried to sound as sincere as I possibly could. They told me that several years had passed since then and that we had a son together now, so they no longer had any reason to doubt me. But I still declined, and I told them that I was not open to discussing this anymore. When I said that, They started to get agitated and told me that it was their idea to have the prenup in the first place, so now I should respect whatever they say and have it dissolved since they no longer thought it was necessary. They said that because they were older and more experienced, we should take their advice to avoid any bitterness in the future. Honestly, I had no idea what they were even talking about. But after some bickering, I told them that I had no interest in talking about the prenup anymore, and since my wife and I had no plans of getting divorced anytime soon, they should drop it as well, but they simply refused to let it go until it turned into a fight, and all the drama that we had been sweeping under the rug for so many years started coming out. I finally brought up how they had only designed the prenup and brought it to me because they wanted to humiliate me and remind me that I was not in the same tax bracket as them. And now that I had surpassed them, they suddenly wanted to pretend that none of that had ever happened. Their point was that they only wanted their daughter's future to be secure, because in case I turned out to be a gold-digging husband who was going to leech off her for as long as we were married, they wanted her to at least have a safety net in the form of that prenup. They claimed they were just looking out for their daughter. So that went on for a while, and after some time, I was too tired to keep arguing with them anymore. I decided to tell them that I was done and that I wanted them to leave. I thought I was being perfectly reasonable by asking them to leave because we were getting too loud and my son was asleep. I didn't want to wake him up. Besides, it was quite late at night, and I just wanted them to go so I could get some sleep and take my mind off everything. However, they took offense at that. They told me that the only reason I had ever been able to get to the place I am today was because of the support that their daughter and they had given me. There, I had to disagree. They had never supported me. They had only ever supported their daughter. I know that in the beginning I mentioned that they would occasionally send money to us while I was still working on my business, and I'm truly grateful to them for that. But that money wasn't for me. It was for their daughter. We could have easily survived without their help because I had some savings of my own. The only times they sent money were when my wife asked them for it, and that money was specifically for her own purposes. Sometimes she'd run short after all the household expenses. I had offered to dip into my savings several times, but she told me not to because her parents had the money and didn't mind helping her. As long as they were sending it to her, they wouldn't have an issue with it. So technically, yes, they supported us, but only for the sake of their daughter. They never had any faith in me. And as for emotional support, let's not even go there. They had never made me feel like part of the family. They had no right to tell me that I wouldn't have gotten to where I am today without their help. I truly believe I could have easily done it without them. They had no role to play in my success and no right to throw it in my face. When I said that, they started yelling at me even louder, and the fight only got worse. They thought I was being ungrateful for saying they had nothing to do with my success. At one point, they turned to my wife and told her that she needed to make a choice, because they had tried to support our relationship for as long as they could, but this had gotten out of hand since I refused to acknowledge their so-called contributions. Somehow, my wife managed to convince them to leave, and since then, we haven't spoken. She stayed in touch with her parents and has been trying to get them to apologize, even though I told her I don't need one. I just want to stay away from them. They can see her freely and even have a relationship with our son, but all I want is space. I really don't feel interested in repairing my relationship with them right now, especially after everything that went down. That fight had been a long time coming, and honestly, I'm surprised we managed to avoid that kind of emotional confrontation for so many years. But anyway, now it's done and dusted, and I just want to stay away from them. However, I recently learned from my wife that while she was trying to convince them to apologize to me for the things they said and the way they've treated me over the years, they were actually trying to brainwash her into divorcing me. Last evening, she came to me with her phone and showed me a bunch of messages. She was pretty upset. She'd been trying so hard to make things normal again because our son really loves his grandparents, and she didn't want things to get weird. Neither did I, to be honest, but after reading those messages, I'm not so sure anymore. They refused to acknowledge that they'd ever treated me badly. In fact, they acted as if they had every right to treat me the way they did, even if it had been humiliating for me. Not only were they defending their behavior, but they were also accusing me of being ungrateful for their support, which again, I don't think ever existed. They think that's why my wife should start rethinking her marriage to me, that she should consider a divorce before it's too late. According to them, I clearly don't love her enough to respect her family, and since I don't want to dissolve the prenup, I must be suspicious of her now that I have money of my own. It's all complete nonsense. Lies they're trying to feed her to make her turn against me. Thankfully, she isn't buying it. She's just exhausted from trying to talk sense into them. The only thing she admits they might have a small point about is that they did, even if somewhat unwillingly, support us financially a little in our early days, when I was working on my business and she was covering most of the expenses. However, I still don't feel like acknowledging that, because it was clearly only because they didn't want to say no to their daughter. It had nothing to do with me. If my wife had let me, I would have used my own savings during that time, and we wouldn't have had to rely on them at all. Besides, they always made sure I never felt accepted in the family. They treated me like I was only with my wife for her money, so it's not like I didn't have to face the consequences of that. So, Am I the one at fault for refusing to be thankful to my in-laws for having supported my wife and me when I was just starting out with my company? Edit. I don't actually have an issue with dissolving the prenup. I just have an issue with the timing of it all. Recently, my wife and I made some big purchases together, but they're under my name. It's not a big deal for her, and it's not for me either, because we love each other, and we're going to make it work no matter how much we fight. In fact, we're not even fighting right now. It's just her opinion versus mine, and I'm considering it. Divorce is definitely not on the table for us, but I guess my in-laws have been doing some thinking of their own, which is why they decided to stir things up at this exact time. It's just the timing that got to me, because even now they haven't stopped suspecting me. They think they care about my wife and always have her best interests at heart, but I don't. That's why they always have to put me down. It's very obvious that even now they still haven't accepted me as part of the family, and that's what I have an issue with. As for how much they supported us financially in the beginning, no, I haven't repaid them, but if they asked for it, I'd have no problem paying it all back. The only reason I haven't offered yet is because I didn't think I owed them that. As soon as my business started making money, my wife didn't have to spend a single dollar out of her own pocket. I've taken great care of her and our family. At this point, I think we can call it even. Whatever money they had contributed, it had been for their daughter, so it had always been given to her directly, and I had no part to play in it. My wife hasn't had to spend much on personal expenses since my business started making money, so I think my debt has been repaid in that way. But even after that, if my in-laws think that I should pay them back now, I would gladly do it if that gets them off my back. Update 1. Hi everyone. So, it has been a week since that fight I had with my in-laws, and from what I've read so far, people have mixed opinions on my situation. But I've made up my mind. I'm going to return all the money. I do have an approximate figure, and I'm doing well for myself now, so I don't want to owe them anything. Neither do I want to constantly feel like I'm indebted to them forever and need to worship the ground they walk on because of that. I want to be able to stand up for myself without having them throw this in my face. And the only way to deal with this problem is by paying them back all the money that they claim to have supported us with in our initial days. I discussed this idea with my wife and she thinks it's good enough, since her parents have not stopped trying to brainwash her into filing for a divorce from me. They think that I have disrespected them several times, even though they've never taken into account the fact that they have also disrespected me and even my family on several occasions. If they can't handle it when I treat them the same way they've treated me and my family for years, then I don't think they have the right to dish it out in the first place either. Besides, I think I was quite polite with them in the beginning before the argument started, and they were the ones who began bringing up personal stuff and going below the belt. But with them, they've always been outright against me and have never even pretended to like me or my family. So I think the way I behaved with them was quite reasonable, after spending so many years suppressing my feelings and trying my best to be respectful. Now, by paying back the money, I will owe them absolutely nothing, since they have never supported me emotionally or even pretended to accept me. Both my wife and I are really exhausted trying to deal with this situation, so we're hoping that writing them a check will solve all our problems. Usually, that's not the way I deal with relationships. I know that throwing money at something doesn't solve the problem. But with them, I think that's the only way to go, because they are literally that materialistic and selfish. I can't imagine any other parents in the world trying to ruin their own daughter's marriage, especially when a child is involved, just because they think their ego is bigger and more important than everything else. It just speaks volumes about how much they actually care for her and how much they like to pretend they have her best interests at heart. But the reality is that the only things they care about are their image, their ego, and themselves. Update 2. Earlier today, my wife spoke to her parents and told them that I was ready to write them a check and end this whole situation, because it was getting exhausting to deal with, even for her. Since all of this had started because of money, maybe writing them a check to repay them for everything they had done for us in the past was going to fix things. But of course, that didn't fix anything. They got offended at the suggestion that they could be bought out. They told my wife that this was not about money, which was strange because, from the way they were behaving during our argument the other day, it felt like it was all about the money. However, now, all of a sudden, it's about respect. The respect I've supposedly never shown them, which is ridiculous because I can literally say the same thing about them. My wife and I don't even know what they're talking about because I have always behaved politely and civilly with them. It's they who've always had an attitude with me. I have literally never disrespected them, but they think that this one incident, me refusing to acknowledge and be thankful for the small financial support they gave us in the beginning, is somehow equal to years and years of them taking advantage of my love for their daughter and constantly trying to instigate me or my family members by being as disrespectful as they possibly can. It's not the same thing at all. At this point, even my wife agrees that they didn't support me nearly as much as they're claiming they did. And on top of that, I've already said I'm going to pay them back, so I won't owe them anything. We don't see where the problem is. If this is going to be about respect instead of money, I really don't think I owe them anything for reasons I've already mentioned. Thankfully, they're not speaking to me at the moment. They're only interacting with their daughter, and my wife is completely on my side. They're still trying to brainwash her into filing for divorce, and now they've even started telling her that she needs to start taking our son under her wing and other nonsense. I honestly can't imagine resuming a normal relationship with them after all of this. It's just pathetic. Ruining our marriage isn't enough for them. Now they want my wife to file for custody just to feed their own egos. I think that alone is reason enough for me not to respect them at all. Because this is exactly the kind of treatment I've been receiving ever since I met my wife. Update 3. It's been slightly over 2 weeks since that fight I had with my in-laws, and for the past couple of days, my wife hasn't been responding to them because she thinks it's a lost battle. She tried her best to explain to her parents why they were wrong, but they kept telling her to file for divorce, and she got tired of trying to fix the situation all by herself. They made it clear they weren't interested in fixing things anymore, so she stopped replying to them. That's why they decided to show up at our house today. I was the one who opened the door to them, and they ignored me completely, just walked straight in and started calling for my wife. At this point, I wasn't even surprised that they were acting like this. After accusing me of being disrespectful to them, they were still behaving the same way. They're just hypocrites, and they'll always be like that. Anyway, I didn't say anything, I just waited for my wife to come out. After a while, when she did, she immediately told her parents that she wasn't interested in speaking to them unless they were ready to acknowledge our side of things. They started telling her that they were only there to confront her about her behavior, because, according to them, she was going down the same path I did and becoming increasingly disrespectful to them as well. They said, "If he's indebted to us, so are you, and you shouldn't forget that." When her parents made that statement, she immediately lost her temper and started shouting at them, and rightfully so. She's their daughter. She hadn't asked them to do anything for her. They'd done it all out of their own free will, and now they didn't have the right to hold it against her. If they'd wished, they could have easily declined to help, and we still would have made it work without them. It's not like other parents don't do things for their kids, but they do it out of love, not because they want to throw it in their faces later, like my in-laws do. As for gratitude, we had tried our best to be grateful to them and show them respect, in spite of their ridiculous behavior with me and my family over the past years. Even then, we hadn't said anything and had quietly put up with it, because we didn't want to create any drama and wanted to be respectful toward them so that the peace in the family was maintained. But at this point, it was impossible not to stand up to them. They have to realize that they cannot constantly demand to be respected. Sometimes, they have to earn it. And this is one of those times. So my wife ended up arguing with them for quite some time, but I said nothing and just stood in the corner because I didn't want to interact with them at all. After some time, my wife started getting agitated, so I went to her side to calm her down. My in-laws then started freaking out at me, blaming me for all of this. Apparently, it had all started because of my refusal to dissolve the prenup. I had to correct them. I told them that this hadn't started because of that. This had started when they decided they were going to treat me badly just because I wasn't from the same circle of rich kids they had expected their daughter to choose from when picking a life partner. That's what they were really mad about all these years, and that's why they had always treated me poorly. But I had put up with it simply because I didn't want to make a whole thing out of it. However, they couldn't get away with it forever, and they needed to realize that, which is exactly why I had refused to dissolve the prenup. They needed to know that I was not going to be a puppet for them and do as they said. Things got even more heated after that since now I was also involved, but I didn't let them get to me and kept my cool. They kept shouting at me, saying horrible things, and cursing me out to make me mad. But I refused to let them get under my skin because I knew that's exactly what they wanted, and that made them even more upset. Then they finally realized that they wouldn't be able to get to me, and so they told my wife that she needed to seriously choose between her family and me. And she declared that she was going to choose her family, which meant she was choosing her husband and her son. She told her parents to get out of her house and that they would be receiving the check soon. After that, we'd be done and dusted. Her parents were shocked because they obviously hadn't expected this reaction from her. They probably believed they were going to get another chance, because that's what usually happens. But, honestly, my wife and I have had enough. And when they tried to argue after that, my wife told them that she was going to call the police and have them arrested if they didn't leave immediately. And they finally left after that. We blocked them everywhere, and we are finally going to cut them out of our lives. It's going to be hard to explain to our son why he can't see his grandparents anymore. But it's fine. He has another set of grandparents who love him just as much. Maybe in the future we'll be able to reconcile, but for now, this has to be done. We had tried really hard to make things work with them, but unfortunately, they only wanted things to work on their terms, and that's just not possible anymore. I'm honestly glad that I took a stand for myself, and so did my wife. Some things had to be addressed, and we are very happy that we finally dealt with the situation.